Welcome to the Disney Wedding Podcast. This show is brought to you by Carrie Hayward's Fairy Tale Weddings Guide, the only guidebook and bridal organizer tailored exclusively to Disney's fairy tale weddings at Walt Disney World. I'm Carrie Hayward, and each week I feature Disney wedding updates, money-saving tips, and interviews with wedding vendors and real Disney couples. I also cover honeymoons, anniversaries, and engagements at the Disney parks and resorts. Join me now as the Disney Wedding Podcast celebrates romance at Disney destinations. Today on the Disney Wedding Podcast, I am speaking with Disney bride Ellie Martin about her ceremony and reception at the Whitehall Room and Patio at the Grand Floridian Resort and her dessert party at Germany Promenade in EPCOT. I thought you guys would be interested to hear how she chose these locations and how she planned everything and how it all turned out. So welcome, Ellie.
Hey, Carrie. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being on the show today. I always like to start at the very beginning and find out how you and your fiancé decided that you wanted to have your wedding at Disney.
So we both come from families who have grown up going to Disney World. We met in high school, and one of the first things that really kind of bonded us was that we loved Disney World and had both grown up going there our whole lives. So Disney is definitely a bonding factor for both of us and our families. But for all the years that we dated, almost 7 years of dating, Dawson never really was super interested in a Disney wedding, but I always really had my heart set on it. And the reason he was never interested is because we live in Kentucky and we're both extremely close to our grandparents. So we knew that making the trip from Kentucky down to Orlando would be a really big feat for them. And so he always just kind of erred on the side of let's stay home so everybody could be there. But then once we got engaged, we kind of started really digging into a Disney wedding and if it was a real possibility for us. And both of our sets of grandparents really encouraged us to just go for what we had our heart set on instead of making sure that they could be there. And I think once we kind of got their okay on it, that they would be okay if they weren't able to make it, we decided that it would be the right choice for us. And so we went ahead and booked.
That's wonderful. How did your friends and family react when they found out you were definitely doing a Disney wedding?
They were ecstatic. Dawson's family, I think, didn't really ever think that it was going to happen. And my family didn't either, but I'm also extremely stubborn. So when my parents heard that it was kind of my heart's desire, even though they thought it was kind of crazy, they were like, oh yeah, she'll probably figure out a way to pull that off. So we were really excited to tell our family and friends, and they were really excited to hear as well.
That's awesome. How many guests did you invite and how many were able to make the trip?
I don't know if your other couples have ever really talked about this before, but instead of just inviting everyone that we really would have loved to see there, we kind of priced out how many we could afford to have there and then moved from there. So we decided that we wanted to have a super small wedding either way. And then especially once we started looking through the pricing, especially of food, we decided that a small wedding was going to be best for us just personally, budget-wise, as well as just kind of preference-wise. So we ended up deciding we could do 25 people. And we ended up inviting 23 and then 21 made it.
Got it. That's a really smart idea because, yeah, your guest count is the number one factor determining how expensive your wedding's going to be at Disney. So the fewer people you invite, the more you can afford to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did you set up a room block for your guests?
Yeah, we did. So our room block story is a little bit wild. We spoke with the room block coordinator and we knew that we wanted to offer a few different places for our guests. So we started out offering the Grand Floridian, All-Star Music because they had the family suites, and then Pop Century. But then after we talked with them, we figured out that it was also an option to add on some resorts that were only available for Dawson and me because we were going to be doing our honeymoon in Disney afterwards. So they told us that if we wanted to add on some that our guests didn't have availability to book at, it would still count towards our minimum. And that was really interesting to me because I hadn't heard that before. So we did that, and we were actually able to fill our room block with just our nights alone that we were staying there before the wedding and then the wedding night and our honeymoon. So that took care of our 10 nights and we got our free night on our wedding night that we used at the Grand Floridian.
That's great. Yeah, we did the same thing. I think sometimes people think that you can only block 3 resorts for a Disney wedding, and that's just what Disney suggests. So yeah, you can definitely have your room block coordinator help you get rooms for yourself, even if you don't want to have your guests stay there, either because it's going to cost so much money to have transportation go to a bunch of different resorts, or, maybe you just want the privacy. Your room block coordinator can do that.
Yes. So after we learned that, because I was under the impression that it was just 3 as well. But after we learned that we could do more, Dawson and I ended up adding on the Polynesian, the Boardwalk, and the Wilderness Lodge just for the 2 of us. He wanted to stay at the Wilderness Lodge the nights before our wedding with his groomsmen. And then on our honeymoon, we did some resort hopping from the Grand Floridian to the Polynesian and then toward the Boardwalk. So we had a grand total of 7 resorts on our room block.
That's so interesting. We did the same thing. We hopped among 4 different resorts, and it made the honeymoon feel so long because every time we moved to a new resort, it felt like we were starting a new vacation.
Yes, it really did. And this was my first trip that I had ever done any resort hopping. And I've been to Disney many, many times. So it was a whole new experience just adding in that aspect. And it made the honeymoon more special because we felt like we got to experience several resorts that either one of us hadn't stayed at before or both of us hadn't stayed at before. So that was really fun to add into the mix.
That's awesome. So then how did you guys choose the day of the week and time of day for your event?
Mostly it was determined by the price factor. Since we were inviting such a small group, we knew that it was going to be a little bit easier to make sure that everyone could get there. So the day of week, we ended up picking a Monday, which is very not traditional for a wedding, I know. And when we told just family and friends back at home that weren't going to make the trip that we were getting on a Monday, we always got a response of like, why? But when you get married in a destination wedding, I feel like the day of week doesn't matter quite as much because you're going to be going somewhere that's away from home anyway. So we landed on a Monday for the pricing structure there, and we decided on February because Dawson and I are both really big into the arts. We love theater, and our hobby together is going to see musicals. So we really wanted to be there during the Festival of the Arts, and we knew that February would kind of give us that pocket of time that was going to be kind of further out from Christmas, I guess, and just a little bit of wiggle room to get away from the holidays, but still make sure that we were there in time for Festival of the Arts. So we picked February, we picked Monday to fit the day of week pricing, and that worked out well for us.
And then for time of day, was that just based on the venues or?
Yeah, so time of day, we had kind of toyed with getting married in EPCOT, but after listening to several episodes of brides who had done that and hearing how they had to get up at like 2 a.m., that definitely scared me out of that. So we decided to pick something that was still going to be early enough in the day that we felt like we had the evening to enjoy staying at the Grand Floridian because it was going to be Dawson's only night staying there. I stayed there the couple nights before the wedding, so I kind of got to experience it a little bit. But we wanted to have time to actually explore the resort and just soak it in since we were only going to be there one night. So we ended up choosing noon to get married because I knew that I would be able to get up early in the morning, but not ridiculously early, and be ready in time. And then we could have everything wrapped up kind of in the early evening hours there so that we had time to soak up the grand.
Got it. Now, how did you decide to have Whitehall room and patio for your ceremony and your reception?
I had been looking at doing the wedding pavilion. And that's kind of what I'd always envisioned just through many years of dreaming of getting married in Disney World. I always thought that I would pick the wedding pavilion for our ceremony. And then when I started looking at your book, I learned that there were so many different options that we kind of explored a few different options. So we thought for a little while that we would do some combination of the wedding pavilion, maybe one of the pavilions in EPCOT, and then we thought that we would do our reception in Citricos. But I learned through your podcast that you could not do a dance floor in Citricos, and dancing was super important to me. So we decided to look at other options. And from there, I kind of found Whitehall Patio because it still had the feelings of the grand, and we wouldn't have to get married super early in the morning like we would at EPCOT. We had a little bit more freedom with the time of day. So once we got to that point, picking Whitehall for both events felt like it just made logistical sense for us since there was the room for our guest count to do both events there. It felt like it would cut down on time and cost of having to do any transportation. So that made sense for us. I also had seen some pictures on Disney's website that had one long Roman table set up under the patio portion of Whitehall. And that just took my breath away. And when I saw that, I was like, that is what I want. And so I knew that the reception would be beautiful there. And once we toured it in person, I knew that the ceremony spot would be perfect there as well.
That's interesting. So usually Disney tries to discourage people from having their ceremony and a full reception in the same spot because there's no time to set up for the reception while the ceremony is going on. Did that limit your plans in any way?
No, it didn't, since we just had the 23 people, including me and Dawson. They didn't have to move anything. There was room throughout the entirety of Whitehall to set up both events. So both were fully set up from the get-go. So we had our reception table and like our cake table, our head table, all of that was set up under the covered portion of Whitehall. And then on the uncovered portion is where we had our ceremony set up. So both were just side by side, simultaneously there, and we didn't have to do any moving.
Got it. And then you did dancing in the room?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Now, did you guys use any outside vendors for the portions of your event that you were able to?
Yeah, we did. So we worked with a photographer and a videography team that are from pretty much our hometown or neighboring towns to our hometown. So all of them are from Western Kentucky, and we just conveniently landed on a couple vendors that happen to be Disney fans as well. And so when we pitched the idea to them of, we love your style and we're wanting to have a Disney wedding, would you be open to traveling for it? Both teams were really excited about that and wanted to add the Disney wedding to their portfolio, and we wanted them to be there because we loved their style. So we brought both those teams with us. So the photography team was Rachel Hauser Photography. So it was Rachel and her husband, Neil. And then for our videography, we had Ezel Film Co., which is Hunter and Logan, and they're a married couple as well. And they were all fantastic. They made everything so smooth, and they gave us the products that we just really wanted, the look that we really wanted. And because they were all Disney fans, they had really good knowledge of the grounds and good spots to get our photos and videos taken at. So it made it look like a more experienced team had done it as far as a team that had shot in Disney before. And then we also had Haley Finnegan for hair and makeup, and she is local to Orlando. I found her through TikTok, and I saw one of her videos and saw that she was doing this little facial on a girl before she started her makeup for her wedding. And when I saw that, I was like, yes, ma'am, this girl is going to be perfect for me. So we booked Haley, and she and her team were also incredible. And then as far as any of our papery, that was done by me. I am a graphic designer and have a little small business of my own. So I did all of our invitations and stationery that was present at the wedding day itself too.
That's great. Now, how did you guys choose your officiant?
We chose our officiant basically just off of word of mouth from your show. So I had heard a lot of good things about Rev Kev, and we reached out to him and just really loved how he corresponded with us. He was very open to doing a unity ceremony that we wanted to do. We wanted to do foot washing. Our faith is super important to us. And so we wanted to incorporate that in, and he was very open to that and made that possible for us. So we picked Rev Kev, and he was fantastic.
That's great. Did you guys add any kind of entertainment to the ceremony or the reception?
So we added in a DJ, and that was DJ Chuck Johnson. I really liked, he had us fill out a questionnaire beforehand and let us really pick all of the songs we wanted to do and really customize our experience as far as if we were outgoing and wanted to do any kind of games, or if he could like poke fun at us, anything like that. He was really detailed in his opening questionnaire, and that made us feel really comfortable with working with him.
That's wonderful. Do you have any menu items or cake flavors that you would recommend?
Yes. So this was super important to me because I have a lot of food allergies and my mom does as well. And then several of our family and friends that were making the trip also have food allergies. So picking a Disney wedding, part of my main motive really was the food. I knew that I would be taken care of, that we would be safe, and that I would have no fear of getting cross-contamination on my wedding day, basically. So we decided to completely customize our menu. We went to the menu tasting in September of last year, and we tasted a lot of great stuff, but we knew from the tasting that we wanted to really be able to customize everything because the food was a huge aspect to us. So we ended up picking the most random assortment of Disney foods that we loved to be on our menu. And even though they didn't all go together, it was just like a menu of all of our best hits, basically. And so it was perfect for us. So we had a mac and cheese action station, and that was amazing. I highly recommend that. It was both fun and delicious. And then for our pre-reception, we had the wings from Ohana, and those were just as good at our wedding as they are at Ohana. We got lots of compliments on those. And then we also did a couple different desserts alongside a gluten-free cake. So for some of our additional desserts, we picked macaron ice cream sandwiches like they have back in France in EPCOT. And those were delicious. They were also gigantic. They are not typically that big in EPCOT, but at our wedding, they made them seriously like the size of my head, which I was not complaining about. And our cake flavors were great too. We had 2 tiers. We had a lavender cake with lemon cream, and that was a combo that we had heard a lot on the podcast, and we tasted that in September when we went down and did our menu tasting. We also did a cake kit tasting, and we fell in love with that combo. And then we also did a tier that was pistachio cake with a white chocolate mousse filling, and that one was great too. They both are super non-traditional wedding cake flavors, and so when our guests heard what they were, I think everyone was kind of like intrigued by these flavors, but everybody loved them. They were delicious.
That's fantastic. Now, did you guys add a dessert party or a welcome party?
We did. So we ended up doing a dessert party on the night before our wedding. It's kind of in lieu of having a rehearsal dinner. We decided that we would do our wedding rehearsal in the afternoon and then kind of go back to the room, rest, freshen up, and go to EPCOT to have the dessert party. So we were in Germany Promenade B, but once we got there, I think that they blocked off A and B for us because I've seen your pictures on your website. And I was really under the impression that B is just kind of that rounded out little bump out. But we definitely had some more space to our left there that they had more tables set up at. So even though our group was small, we had a lot of room to spread out there. And the food setup was also fantastic there. We had maple popcorn, and that one was a huge hit with everybody. And then we also ended up doing a gluten-free version of the Dole Whip cream puffs. My husband loved those at the tasting. So we talked with the chef, and he told us that he thought they would be able to do a gluten-free version where they just did like a gluten-free sugar cookie and then gluten-free pastry with the Dole Whip cream inside. And my husband and my dad both, my parents went to the tasting with us, and they both said that it was super close to the real one that they had at the tasting. So that was good for us to hear because we couldn't have those at the tasting, so I didn't know how closely they had aligned. But apparently they did very well, and they tasted good to me, of course. And then we also did a savory option there because since we weren't doing like a true dinner, I wanted us to still have something that felt kind of substantial. So we ended up doing a chips and dip kind of bar. So we had tortilla chips with guacamole, salsa, and queso. And I'm so glad that we ended up having that because it ended up being pretty chilly the night of our dessert party. And that warm chips and queso really kind of kept everybody warm from the inside out.
Did you add a ride mix in?
We did not. I definitely had some interest there, but after just the pricing of doing all of the wedding and then looking at it and seeing what it was going to cost for some of our guests to be able to ride. And I knew several of our guests wouldn't be able to ride whatever I chose anyway. And I wanted everybody to be able to do it. And if everyone was going to do it, I wanted to make sure that it was going to be a ride I wanted to do. And the ones that everyone was going to be in for was not a ride that I was going to want to pay for. So we ended up foregoing that.
Got it. Can you give my listeners a timeline of how the wedding day ran?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started out at about 6:30 a.m. is whenever the hair and makeup team arrived. We had a 2-bedroom villa at the Grand Floridian that all of the girls got ready in. So my bridesmaids stayed with me and my parents stayed with me as well. And then my sister and niece and her husband stayed next door to us. So they all came over in the morning and we had that villa packed out with everybody getting ready. But it was really fun having everybody all together. And truly that is like the most beautiful hotel room I've ever been in my life. So I was very excited to be there. So that was at 6:30. And then about 8:30 is whenever our photo and video teams arrived. So simultaneously, Dawson and his groomsmen were getting ready at the Wilderness Lodge, but they definitely did not get up at 6:30. I don't know what time they were getting up, but I know that it was not that early. Then around 9:30, my sister gave me a Letters to the Bride book, which in hindsight we have laughed about because she did that after my hair and makeup was done. And I definitely cried off some makeup that we then had to have touched up. But she told me she knew she wanted to give it to me after the photo and video teams had gotten there because she knew that I would want that documented. So we had to wait till they were there. I just happened to already be ready by then. So we had to do a little bit of touch up there. And then around 10 a.m. is whenever I was getting into my dress. And we started kind of falling behind schedule here. But thankfully, our teams were all very experienced and were able to get us back on track and kind of make up the time there. And then around 10:30, I had my first look with my dad. And Dawson and his groomsmen headed to the Grand Floridian. And there is a very fun story attached to this. They got to the dock at the Wilderness. And he said that they were looking out and it was just very crowded there at the dock in the morning. And no boats were really coming up. And then they saw this smaller boat with just one gentleman driving it. And when he got up to the dock, he said, "You all look like you've got somewhere important to be." And my brother-in-law was like, "Oh, yes, this guy's getting married today." And the captain of the boat was very excited for him. He was like, "Well, then it looks like you all are going to get a private ride." And so he invited them to go on this boat. And it was just Dawson and his dad and his brother and then my brother-in-law. And they all got to go over together on this private little boat ride to the Grand Floridian to meet us. They got to stop over Magic Kingdom, and he kind of docked them there for a second so that they could get pictures and videos with the castle behind them. And those turned out so special. So it's just little pieces like that that are Disney magic that you don't get anywhere else. So then after Dawson and the guys got to the Grand Floridian, that was about 10:45, and he and I had our first look. So we ended up doing this outside, kind of on the beach area out there at Grand Floridian. And that was really nice because it just broke up all of our pictures so that it gave kind of a new background to some of them. And that was at suggestion of Rachel, our photographer, and I think that turned out great. So we shared private vows there on the beach and exchanged gifts and just had a few minutes to kind of decompress and finally see each other after not seeing each other for several hours the night before and everything. So that was really nice. And then at around 11, we went into the Grand Floridian where Disney had a magical surprise for us. So when we got in, we had Emily as our day of coordinator, I guess. And whenever she walked us in, she said, "We have a couple special guests that would like to wish you well on your wedding day." And we were really excited and kind of confused. And she walked us up to Chip and Dale, who were already meeting with all of our guests right there in the Grand Floridian lobby. So that was really exciting because we hadn't chosen to book any characters and definitely didn't expect to see any. And after kind of talking with my dad after the wedding, he had told me that Emily had talked to him before Dawson and I had gotten back inside from our first look, and they had arranged that just specially for our wedding. So we didn't get them for the chunk of time that, couples get them if you actually book the characters, but we got them for 5 or 10 minutes to do just pictures with all of our guests and get to say hi and have our flower girls love on them. And that was just really special.
Wow.
Then at about 11:30 is when we went over to Whitehall. We got everybody in place for the ceremony and did a little bit of touch-ups. And then at noon, our ceremony started. So we were very glad everything started on time, even though we got behind there in the morning. And then our ceremony was pretty short, just about 20 minutes or so. So afterwards, we did all of our portraits, family portraits, bridal party portraits, and our pre-reception was going on then at the same time. So we just kind of had everybody hopping in for pictures, and the ones that weren't in pictures were grabbing their pre-reception food, and that was really nice. And then Dawson and I got to go to a little private room that was in the convention center, and they had it set up already with all of our dishes from the pre-reception plated for us. And Dawson and I did not know that was going to happen, and it was just really nice because we got to decompress together. Even though we didn't have the huge crowd and hustle and bustle of a lot of weddings, it still was just nice to be able to have a couple minutes alone there. And Emily bustled me in my dress, which was also fantastic because my sister and my mom had been stressing over figuring out how they were going to bustle me quickly. So she did that like a pro, had never seen my dress and did it like she did it every day of her life, which I'm sure she does. And we were thankful for her for sure for that. Then after the pre-reception had wrapped up, we did our toast for our maid of honor and best man. And Dawson and I had our first dance. And then after that, the food was served. So we had our lunch. And at the end of that, we cut our cake. And then we had about an hour and a half of dancing. And then Dawson and I decided to do a private last dance. So that was around 4:30 p.m. He and I did our private last dance with just our photo and video team in there with us. And after that, we were kind of all wrapped up with the wedding festivities. So we hugged on everybody and thanked everybody for being there and kind of bid them adieu. And we had our bride and groom portraits. So we did a lot of bride and groom portraits. So we did that for probably an hour and a half or so, just around all of the grounds of the Grand Floridian. And I'm really glad that we did that because we got some really beautiful images and video clips just with various backgrounds all over the resort. And that was also at the suggestion of our photo and video teams. And they really had a great eye for that. It started pouring, raining, but we just trudged on. I was like, you know what? I'm not wearing this dress again. So it is perfectly fine if it gets rained on. And then when we were all finished up, we went back to the villa that my parents were still staying at and gave them some of our wedding things because they had driven down so that we could bring a lot of our wedding supplies with us. And they took my dress, they took Dawson's tux, and we were very glad to get rid of those and not have to keep up with those throughout the next week of our honeymoon. And then he and I went and checked in to the Grand Floridian, and that was the whole wedding day.
Now, when you were planning, what were some of the most important aspects of the event? You mentioned having the allergy-friendly menu.
Yes, so food was definitely a top priority for us. And then having photo and video teams that we really loved the style of was also a huge factor, which is part of why we brought them all the way from home. And then another thing that was really important to me was all of our papery. Just in my field and what I do. I love having really quality stationery, I guess, things that are really well thought out and that looked like us, that really matched our wedding day and our style. So it was important to me to have pieces that felt perfect for our day, and I'm a little bit of a control freak, so doing that myself gave me a lot of peace over it. So we put a lot of energy into doing that.
That's wonderful. Were there any aspects that were less important where you saved your money or your effort?
Definitely. So part of what was not as important to us was the decor. I think after we saw Whitehall Patio in person, I got even more comfortable with letting go of some of our decor that we had originally thought we would use. So once we went and saw it in person, which was a few months before our wedding, we had already had our floral call and kind of decided what we were going to do floral and decor wise. But once we actually laid eyes on it, we looked at it and decided that the spot where we were actually going to have the ceremony was really beautiful and had a lot of natural greenery. And so we decided to forego some of the floral arrangements that we had originally had there, and that saved us a lot of money. I had seen one of your couples, and I cannot remember who it is now, but I have a photo of the bride and groom, which sounds rather creepy. A little folder on my desktop of my inspiration pictures, and they just had scattered petals on the ground of their ceremony. And so I showed that to our floral planner and told her I would really like to just do that. And so they had some scattered rose petals in shades of cream and white. And honestly, I loved that. I think it turned out really elegant. So we saved a lot of money there on the decor. But one piece of decor that was really important to me to keep were the chair upgrades. So we chose the clear Chiavari chairs. And I think just that one upgrade made a huge difference in how the space looked. So I definitely recommend kind of taking a look at what you can scale back on and what pieces of decor will have the biggest impact, because those chairs definitely made a big impact for just one aspect of decor. And then another thing that wasn't as important to us was having entertainment for our guests, which kind of sounds bad, I guess. I just mean by that we didn't do things just to make the experience something that would be kind of unforgettable. I feel like for us, we wanted it to feel really intimate and sweet. And I kept saying to my planner and to my parents, I wanted it to feel like a wedding at Disney and not a Disney wedding. So I wanted it to feel as much like a normal wedding, but just kind of placed into our favorite place as possible. So we decided to forego doing any kind of characters or the ride mix-in, stuff like that. And then lastly, for our dessert party, we didn't do any decor. And I don't think anyone noticed. So that was something that I kind of went back and forth on of, is it important? Is it not? And ultimately we decided it's dark and it's not even the actual wedding day. So it's okay if we kind of save a little bit there. And we did not have a sprinkle of decor. I think Disney ended up putting a few votive candles on each table, which was very nice and kind of served all the purpose that it needed to for us.
That's fantastic. So out of all of this, what ended up being your favorite memory of your wedding day?
Oh my goodness, it is so hard to pick. I think of the actual wedding day, coming down the aisle was really special. I had a song picked out that I kept a secret from Dawson for years. I knew that I wanted to use it at our wedding someday. And then coming down the aisle to it, he was really surprised and he cried, which was very touching. So that was a really special moment. And then also, just kind of on a more fun note, when we saw our reception space for the first time, I was just astounded. Like, they had literally taken all of my inspiration, just exactly what I had pictured in my head, and made it happen. And it was stunning. It was all I had wanted. And I was just so happy with how they'd put it all together. They really listened to what I wanted and created the dream space for us. So walking into that and seeing how beautiful they had made it was so exciting for me, and I guess for Dawson too, but maybe a little less exciting for him. So those two moments really stand out for me.
Now, did anything go wrong or just not turn out like you expected?
Things definitely went wrong, but thankfully nothing too major. So a lot of things that kind of went wrong beforehand, which is good because we had time to fix them. For example, we had really stressed to the planning team how important it was for our entire menu to be gluten-free. I have a severe gluten allergy. My mom has a severe gluten allergy. And then one of the members of our bridal party also has a severe gluten allergy. So just in combination of all of us, it was very important to me. But also selfishly, I wanted everything at my wedding to be something that I could enjoy. I didn't want to look at somebody eating something and think, man, if only I could have that. So we stressed to our planning team that every single item that was served at both our dessert party and our wedding needed to be gluten-free. And we were given just a lot of assurance through the whole thing. Everything's going to be safe. Everything's going to be safe. And we had specifically talked to our chef at the menu tasting about some different items that we wanted included. So when we had talked to him for our dessert party, I had said, I would really love if we could do some kind of salty snack at our dessert party, something maybe that is not typically available gluten-free in the parks. And he said, what about a pretzel? And I was like, that sounds genius. Let's do a soft pretzel. But I was skeptical because I've been gluten-free for over a decade. And I was like, I have never seen a gluten-free soft pretzel before. Let's see if you can do this sorcery. And he was like, oh yeah, we can definitely make it. It'll be fine. And so I was really excited about these pretzels. And then about 2 weeks before the wedding, my mom and I were talking and she was like, I kind of have a bad feeling about these pretzels. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And she was like, no, I'm serious. I don't know. Don't you think it's just kind of a big ask? And I was like, it is. But if somebody can do it, it's going to be Disney. But I will check because the last thing we want is to get there and realize, oh my goodness, we can't eat any of this because it could all be cross-contaminated from these pretzels. So I emailed my planner. She said she would check with the chef. Days later, she emails me back and says, everything is gluten-free except for the pretzels. And I was disappointed just because it had been something that we had really talked in depth about for a long time in person. I knew it wasn't a miscommunication as far as can these be gluten-free. From the get-go, we had been told yes, it was a suggestion he had made, and so we thought that this would be no problem. But I told her, I'm disappointed about this, but that's okay. The most important thing is that everything is going to be gluten-free. So what can we sub it out for? So the chef made a couple recommendations. I had a couple questions about some different things, and we ended up landing on the chips and queso and salsa and guacamole, which was delicious. So it ended up being just fine, but the 2 week before runaround of the pretzels was really stressful. And then on top of that, the day before we got to Orlando, I believe we got there on a Saturday, and then we had dessert party on Sunday and wedding on Monday. So the day that we were driving down on Friday, we still did not have our completed BEO. And that had me in a panic. I really wanted to know exactly what was expected to happen. I wanted in writing that every single menu item was to be made gluten-free. I wanted in writing that our cake was going to be gluten-free. Just several things that we had really discussed a lot through the planning process that was important to me. I wanted to make sure that those things were in writing in our BEO so that there was no chance of miscommunication across the tons and tons of people that it takes to pull off a Disney wedding. So I'm sure that is why it took so long to get us our BEO. But when we were driving down to Orlando and still did not have that thing complete, I was like, holy cow, we are not going to have this contract ready. We're going to be getting married with no BEO. But they did pull it out. So that was fine. It was just a little bit of stress leading up to the wedding there. And then the only thing that really went wrong on the day of the wedding was during our ceremony, before I was going to walk down the aisle, when all of our family was being seated, we had requested Rob as our violinist, and we got him. We had a whole little party whenever we got the email that said we had Rob. I was tickled to have him. And we had given him a list of music for when each section of people is coming down the aisle, when the family's being seated, groomsmen come down, etc. And one song got turned on a little too early, so my parents came down to the song that Dawson was supposed to be coming down to, which was the Raiders of the Lost Ark March. So my parents came on down to Indiana Jones, which was fine, but not what we had really intended. But if that is the only thing that goes wrong on wedding day, we did not do too bad. So that was the only thing that really was a hiccup, and everything else was super smooth.
That's wonderful. Was there anything that seemed like a big deal beforehand or you were worried about and then it turned out not to be?
The ceremony decor, a little bit, was something that before seeing it in person, I kept thinking, it's going to look so bare. We're going to be up there and it's going to just look like we didn't plan this and that we just decided to stand right here for the wedding. But that did not end up being a big deal at all. It was beautiful without anything intentionally behind it, and I was happy with how that turned out. And then the other thing was when we very first started planning, I didn't know I don't know how many hours Disney says, I think 4 for a reception. I thought that seemed really fast. My sister and I used to film weddings in high school and college, and so we've been to a lot of weddings. And I was thinking 4 hours for a reception seems kind of fast for everyone to eat, all the toasts and ceremonial things to be done, and a fair share of dancing. But we had plenty of all of it. So they really do have it down to a science. When they tell you this time is going to be enough time, they're right. So that worked out just fine. Just trust Disney. They've done plenty of weddings, and they really do have it nailed down.
Is there anything you would have done differently knowing what you know now?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think everything really came together just as I envisioned it, and it was exactly what we had always dreamed of. So it was amazing, and I'm very thankful that everything went that way.
Any other tips or advice for future Disney couples?
My biggest pieces of advice is definitely consider that honeymoon room block option. If you're going to be honeymooning in Disney, it's certainly worth looking into how many of your minimum nights could be filled just by your own honeymoon nights. And then don't be afraid to push back with your planner. Kindly, of course, but just because they initially say no or that's not how we typically do it doesn't mean that it can't be done a different way. For example, our ceremony, we had a very small group of people, and several of the people that came to our wedding were in our bridal party. So we ended up having between Dawson and me, and then our bridesmaids, groomsmen, and a groom's girl, and then our flower girls, we had over half of our whole guest count was up front. So we didn't need many chairs. And the floral and decor team really encouraged us to have several open chairs, make it look like it was fuller. And I knew that just wasn't really necessary. I didn't care if it looked full because I knew we were only having 20-something people there, and that was perfectly okay with me. So I told them, no, it's okay. We don't need these extra couple rows. And then they had said, let's do 2 sections, with the aisle down the middle. and each row have 4 chairs. But for the way that our families were going to be sitting together, it just made more sense to have rows of 3 because most of our families were in groups of 3. So we told them that, and Disney kind of encouraged us, I will say, to not do that. They said it looks awkward whenever you have the odd number. You're going to be splitting up your guests. And I assured them, no, I am a control freak. I've planned this out. And the 4 chairs per row would be splitting up our guests more. I really think I can tell these 10 people of our group, here's where you should sit. And they will be happy to do so. And the 3 chairs per row will work out just fine. And after we had that conversation, Disney was like, okay, fine. If that's how you want to do it, we will set it up that way for you. And it did work out really well for us. So definitely don't be hateful, but feel open to asking your planner, can this be done a different way? Because it would work out better for whatever you have in mind.
That's great advice. Well, Ellie, I think you've offered a lot of great tips and advice for anyone who's interested in getting married or having a vow renewal at Walt Disney World, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Carrie. This has been a blast.
That's our show for today. I'm your host, Carrie Hayward, inviting you to join me again next week for another episode of the Disney Wedding Podcast. Past shows and tons of photos for each episode are available on my website, DisneyWeddingPodcast.com, or listen in your favorite podcast app. And for instant answers to all your Walt Disney World wedding questions, check out Carrie Hayward's Fairy Tale Weddings Guide, available as an interactive ebook with continual free updates at fairytaleweddingsguide.com.